3. Dujek One-Arm and his army awaited the arrival of Caladan Brood and his allies. The fell Tista Andi, Barghast clans from the far north, a half-score mercenary contingents, and the plains-dwelling Rivi. There, on the still raw killing ground outside the city of Pale, the two forces would meet. Not to wage war, but to carve from bitter history, peace. Neither Dujek nor Brood, nor anyone else among their legendary company, could have anticipated the ensuing clash. Not of swords, but of worlds. Confessions of Ardanthos. Shallow ridges ribboned the hillsides a league north of Pale, barely healed scars of a time when the city's presumptions reached out to devour the steppes bordering the Rivi plain. Since memories began, the hills had been sacred to the Rivi. Pale's farmers had paid for their temerity with blood. Yet the land was slow to heal. Few of the ancient menhirs, boulder rings and flat stone crypts remained in place. The stones were now haphazardly piled into meaningless cairns alongside what used to be terraced fields of maize. All that was sacred in these hills was held so only within the minds of the Rivi. As in faith, so we are in truth. The Maibi drew the antelope hide closer about her thin, bony shoulders. A new array of pains and aches mapped her frame this morning, evidence that the child had drawn more from her in the night just past. The old woman told herself she felt no resentment. Such needs could not be circumvented, and there was little in the child that was natural in any case. Vast, cold-hearted spirits and the blind spells of sorcery had conspired to carve into being something new, unique. And time was growing short, so very short. The Maibi's dark eyes glittered within their nests of wrinkles as she watched the child scampering over the weathered terraces. Her mother's instincts ever abided. It was not right to curse them, to lash out at the bindings of love that came in the division of flesh. For all the flaws raging within her, and for all the twisted demands woven into her daughter, the Maibi could not, would not, spin webs of hate. Nonetheless, the withering of her body weakened the gifts of the heart to which she so desperately clung. Less than a season past, the Maibi had been a young woman, not yet wedded. She had been proud, unwilling to accept the half-braids of grass that numerous young virile men had set down before the entrance to her tent, not yet ready to entwine her own braid and thus bind herself to marriage. The Rivi were a damaged people. How could one think of husband and family in this time of endless, devastating war? She was not as blind as her sister kin. She did not embrace the supposed spirit-blessed duty to produce sons to feed into the ground before the reaper's plough. Her mother had been a reader of bones, gifted with the ability to hold the people's entire repository of memories, every lineage reaching back to the dying spirit's tear. And her father had held the spear of war, first against the white-faced Barghast, then against the Malazan Empire. She missed them both, deeply, yet understood how their deaths and her own defiance of accepting a man's touch had together conspired to make her the ideal choice in the eyes of the host of spirits. An untethered vessel, a vessel in which to place two shattered souls, one beyond death, and the other held back from death through ancient sorceries, two identities braided together, a vessel that would be used to feed the unnatural child thus created. Among the Rivi who travelled with the herds and raised no walls of stone or brick, such a container, intended for a singular use after which it would be discarded, was called a Maibi, and so she had found herself a new name, and now every truth of her life was held within it. Old, without wisdom, weathered, without the gift of years, yet I am expected to guide this child, this creature, who gains a season with every one I lose, for whom weaning will mean my death. Look at her now, playing the games a child would play. She smiles all unknowing of the price her existence, her growth, demands of me. The Maibi heard footsteps behind her, and a moment later a tall, black-skinned woman arrived to stand beside the Rivi. The newcomer's angled eyes held on the child playing on the hillside. The prairie wind sent strands of long black hair over her face. Fine, scaled armour glinted from beneath her black-dyed, rawhide shirt. Deceptive, the Tista Andi woman murmured. Is she not? The Maibi sighed, then nodded. Hardly a thing to generate fear, the midnight-skinned woman continued, or be the focus of searing arguments. There have been more, then? Aye. Kalor renews his assault. The Maibi stiffened. She looked up at the Tista Andi. And? Has there been a change, Corlat? Brood remains steadfast, Corlat replied after a moment. She shrugged. If he has doubts, he hides them well. He has, the Maibi said. Yet his need for the Rivi and our herds outweighs them still. This is calculation, not faith. Will such need remain, once an alliance with the one-armed Malazan is fashioned? It is hoped, Corlat ventured, that the Malazans will possess more knowledge of the child's origins. Enough to alleviate the potential threat? You must make Brood understand, Corlat, that what the two souls once were is nothing to what they have become. Her eyes on the playing child, the Maibi continued. She was created within the influence of a Talan Imas. Its timeless warren became the binding threads, and were so woven by an Imas bonecaster, a bonecaster of flesh and blood, Corlat. This child belongs to the Talan Imas. She may well be clothed in the flesh of a Rivi, and she may well contain the souls of 2 Malazan mages. But she is now a soul-taken, and more, a bone-caster. And even these truths but brush the edges of what she will become. Tell me, what need have the immortal Talan Imas for a flesh-and-blood bone-caster? Corlat's grimace was wry. I am not the person to ask, nor are the Malazans. Are you certain of that? Did not the Talan Imas march under Malazan banners? Yet they do so no longer, Corlat. What hidden breach exists between them now? What secret motives might lie beneath all that the Malazans advise? We have no way of guessing, have we? I imagine Caladan Brood is aware of such possibilities, the Tista Andi said dryly. In any case, you may witness and partake in these matters, Maybe. The Malazan contingent approaches, and the warlord seeks your presence at the parley. The Maybe turned about. Caladan Brood's encampment stretched out before her, precisely organized as usual. Mercenary elements to the west, the Tista Andi holding the centre, and her own Rivi camps in the Bedouin herds to the east. The march had been a long one, from the old King Plateau, through the cities of Kat and then Patch, and finally onto the south-winding old Rivi trail crossing the plain that was the Rivi's traditional home. A home torn apart by years of war, of marching armies and the incendiaries of the Maranth falling from the sky, calls whirling in black-specked silence, horror descending on our camps, our sacred herds. Yet now we are to clasp wrists with our enemy. With the Malazan invaders and the cold-blooded Maranth, we are to weave braids of marriage. Our 2 armies, jaws locked on one another's throats for so long, but a marriage not in the name of peace. No, these warriors now seek another enemy, a new enemy. Beyond Brood's army to the south rose the recently mended walls of Pale, the stains of violence a chilling reminder of Malazan's sorceries. A knot of riders had just departed from the city's north gate, an unmarked grey banner announcing their outlawry for all to see, as they slowly rode across the bare killing ground towards Brood's encampment. The Maybe's gaze narrowed suspiciously on that pennant. Old woman, your fears are a curse. Think not of mistrust. Think not of the horrors visited upon us by these once invaders. Duchek One Arm and his host have been outlawed by the hated Empress. One campaign has ended. A new one begins. Spirits below, shall we ever see an end to war? The child joined the 2 women. The Maybe glanced down at her, saw within the steady, unwavering eyes of the girl a knowledge and wisdom that seemed born of millennia. And perhaps it was indeed so. Here we 3 stand, for all to see, a child of 10 or 11 years, a woman of youthful visage, with unhuman eyes, and a bent old woman. And it is in every detail an illusion, for what lies within us is reversed. I am the child. The Tista Andi has known thousands of years of life, and the girl, hundreds of thousands. Corlat had also looked down at the child. The Tista Andi smiled. Did you enjoy your play, Silver Fox? For a time, the girl replied in a voice surprisingly low. But I grew sad. Corlat's brows rose. And why is that? There was once a sacred trust here, between these hills and spirits of the Rivi. It is now broken. The spirits were naught but untethered vessels of loss and pain. The hills will not heal. The Maybe felt her blood turn to ice. Increasingly, the child was revealing a sensitivity to rival the wisest shoulder woman among the tribes. Yet there was a certain coolness to that sensitivity, as if a hidden intent lay behind every compassionate word. Can nothing be done, daughter? Silver Fox shrugged. It is no longer necessary. Such as now, the Maybe thought. What do you mean? The round-faced girl smiled up at the Maybe. If we are to witness the parley, Mother, we'd best hurry. The place of meeting was 30 paces beyond the outermost pickets, situated on a low rise. The recent barrows that had been raised to dispose of the dead after the fall of Pale were visible to the west. The Maybe wondered if those countless victims now watched from afar the scene unfolding before her. Spirits are born of spilled blood, after all, she thought. And without propitiation, they often twist into inimical forces, plagued by nightmare visions and filled with spite. Is it only the Rivi who know these truths? From war to alliance, how would such ghosts look upon this? They feel betrayed, Silver Fox said beside her. I will answer them, Mother. She reached out to take the Maybe's hand as they walked. This is a time for memories, ancient memories, and recent memories. And you, daughter? The Maybe asked in a low, febrile tone. Are you the bridge between the two? You are wise, Mother. Despite your own lack of faith in yourself, the hidden is slowly revealed. Look on these once enemies. You fight in your mind, raising up all the differences between us. You struggle to hold on to your dislike, your hatred of them, for that is what is familiar. Memories are the foundations of such hatred. But, Mother, memories hold another truth, a secret one, and that is all that we have experienced, yes? The Maybe nodded. So our elders tell us, daughter, she said, biting back a faint irritation. Experiences. They are what we share, from opposite sides perhaps, but they are the same. The same. I know this, Silver Fox. Blame is meaningless. We are all pulled, as tides are pulled, by an unseen, implacable will. The girl's hand tightened in the Maybe's hand. Then ask Corlat, Mother, what her memories tell her. Glancing over at the Tista Andi, the Rivy woman raised her brows and said, You have been listening yet saying nothing. What reply does my daughter expect from you? Corlat's smile was wistful. Experiences are the same. Between your two armies, indeed. But also, across the breadth of time, among all who possess memories, whether an individual or a people, life's lessons are ever the same lessons. The Tista Andi's now violet eyes rested on Silver Fox. Even among the Talanai mass. Is this what you are telling us, child? She shrugged. In all that is to come, think on forgiveness. Hold to it, but know too that it must not always be freely given. Silver Fox swung her sleepy gaze to Corlat, and the dark eyes suddenly hardened. Sometimes forgiveness must be denied. Silence followed. Dear spirits, guide us, the Maybe thought. This child frightens me. Indeed, I can understand Calor, and that is more worrying than anything else. They came to a halt far to one side of the place of parley, just beyond the pickets of Brood's encampment. Moments later, the Malazans reached the rise. There were 4 of them. The Maybe had no difficulty in recognizing Dujek, the now renegade High Fist. The one-armed man was older than she'd expected, however, and he sat in the saddle of his roan gelding as would a man pained with old aches and stiff bones. He was thin, of average height, wearing plain armor and an undecorated standard-issue shortsword strapped to his belt. His narrow, hatchet face was beardless, displaying a lifetime of battle scars. He wore no helmet, the only indication of rank being his long, grey cape and its silver-wrought fastening. At Dujek's left side rode another officer, grey-bearded and solidly built. A visored helm with a chain camail disguised much of his features, but the Maybe sensed in him an immeasurable strength of will. He sat straight in his saddle, though she noted that his left leg was held awkwardly, the boot not in the stirrup. The chain of his calf-length hauberk was battered and ribboned with leather stitches. That he sat on Dujek's unprotected left side was not lost on the Maybe. To the renegade High Fist's right sat a young man, evidently an aide of some sort. He was nondescript, yet she saw that his eyes roved ceaselessly, taking in details of all that he saw. It was this man who held the outlawry pennon in one leather-gloved hand. The 4th rider was a black Moranth, entirely encased in chitinous armor, and that armor was badly damaged. The warrior had lost all 4 fingers of his right hand, yet he continued to wear what was left of his gauntlet. Countless sword slashes marred the gleaming black armor. Corlat grunted softly beside her. That's a hard-bitten lot, wouldn't you say? The Maybe nodded. Who is that on Dujek One-Arm's left? Whiskey Jack, I would imagine, the Tista Andi replied with a wry smile. Cuts quite a figure, doesn't he? For a moment, the Maybe felt like the young woman that she was in truth. She wrinkled her nose. Rivy aren't that hairy, thank the spirits. Even so, aye, even so. Silver Fox spoke. I would like him for an uncle. The 2 women looked down at her in surprise. An uncle? The Maybe asked. The girl nodded. You can trust him. While the one-armed old man is hiding something, well, no, they both are, and it's the same secret, yet I trust the bearded one anyway. The Moranth, he laughs inside, always laughs, and no one knows this. Not a cruel laugh, but one filled with sorrow. And the one with the banner? Silver Fox frowned. I am uncertain of him. I think I always have been. The Maybe met Corlat's eyes over the girl's head. I suggest, the Tista Andi said, we move closer. As they approached the rise, 2 figures emerged from the picket line, followed by an outrider bearing a pennonless standard, all on foot. Seeing them, the Maybe wondered what the Malazans would make of the 2 warriors in the lead. There was Bargar's blood in Caladan Brood, reflected in his tall, hulking form and his wide, flat face. And something else besides, something not quite human. The man was huge, well matched to the iron hammer strapped to his back. He and Dujek had been duelling on this continent for over 12 years, a clash of wills that had seen more than a score pitched battles and as many sieges. Both soldiers had faced dire odds more than once, yet had come through, bloodied but alive. They had long since taken the measure of the other on fields of battle, but now, finally, they were about to come face to face. At Brood's side strode Calor, tall, gaunt, and grey. His full-length surcoat of chain glittered in the morning's diffuse light. A plain bastard sword hung from the iron rings of his harness, swinging in time with his heavy steps. If any player in this deadly game had remained a mystery to the Maybe, it was the self-named High King. Indeed, all the Rivy woman could be certain of was Callor's hatred for Silver Fox, a hatred bred of fear, and perhaps a knowledge that the man alone possessed, a knowledge he was unwilling to share with anyone. Callor claimed to have lived through millennia, claimed to have once ruled an empire that he himself had finally destroyed, for reasons he would not reveal. Yet he was not an ascendant. His longevity probably came from alchemies, and was anything but perfect, for his face and body were as ravaged as those of a mortal man who was nearing a century of life. Brood made use of Callor's knowledge of tactics, what seemed an instinctive mastery of the sweep and shift of vast campaigns. But for the High King, it was clear to all that such contests were but passing games, attended to with distraction and barely veiled disinterest. Callor commanded no loyalty among the soldiers. Grudging respect was all the man achieved, and, the might be suspected, all he ever had achieved, or ever would. His expression now, as he and Brood reached the rise, revealed disdain and contempt as he regarded Dujek, Whiskey Jack, and the Maranth commander. It would be a struggle not to take offence, yet all three Malazans seemed to be ignoring the High King as they dismounted, their attention fixed unwaveringly on Caladan Brood. Dujek One-Arm stepped forward.
"Greetings, Warlord. Permit me to introduce my modest contingent. Second in command, Whiskey Jack. Artanthos, my present standard-bearer, and the leader of the Black Maranth, whose title translates into something like Achievement, and whose name is entirely unpronounceable."
The renegade High Fist grinned over at the armoured figure.
"Since he shook hands with the Rivy spirit up in Black Dog Forest, we've taken to calling him Twist."
"Artanthos," Silver Fox quietly murmured. "He's not used that name in a long time, nor is he as he appears. If an illusion," Corlat whispered, "then it is masterful. I sense nothing untowards."
The child nodded.
"The prairie airs rejuvenated him."
"Who is he, daughter?" the Maybe asked.
"A chimera, in truth."
Following Dujek's words, Brood grunted and said,
"At my side is Callor, my second in command. On behalf of the Tista Andi is Corlat. Of the Rivy, the Maybe and her young charge. Bearing what's left of my standard is Outrider Hurlakel."
Dujek was frowning.
"Where is the Crimson Guard? Prince Kazdavora and his forces are attending to internal matters, for the moment, High Fist. They will not be joining our efforts against the Panyan Domin." "Too bad," Dujek muttered.
Brood shrugged.
"Auxiliary units have been assembled to replace them. A Saltoan horse regiment, 4 clans of the Bargast, a mercenary company from One-Eye Cat, and another from Mott."
Whiskey Jack seemed to choke. He coughed, then shook his head.
"That wouldn't be the Mott irregulars, Warlord, would it?"
Brood's smile revealed filed teeth.
"Aye, you've some experience with them, haven't you, Commander? When you soldiered among the bridge burners." "They were a handful," Whiskey Jack agreed. "Though not just in a fight. They spent most of their time stealing our supplies, then running away, as I recall. A talent for logistics, we called it," Callor commented. "I trust," Brood said to Dujek, "that the arrangements with Darujistan's council have proved satisfactory." "They have, Warlord. Their donations have allowed us to fulfill our resupply needs. I believe a delegation is on its way from Darujistan and should be here in a short while," Brood added. "Should you require additional assistance?" "Generous of them," the High Fist said, nodding. "The command tent awaits us," the Warlord said. "There are details that need to be discussed." "As you say," Dujek agreed. "Warlord, we have battled one another for a long time. I look forward to fighting side by side for a change. Let us hope the Panyan Domin proves a worthy foe." Brood grimaced. "That's not too worthy." "Granted," Dujek said, grinning. Still standing slightly apart with the Tista Andi and the Maybe, Silver Fox smiled and spoke quietly.
"So we have it. They have locked gazes, taken the measure of the other, and both are pleased." "A remarkable alliance, this," Corlat muttered with a faint shake of her head. "To so easily relinquish so much." "Pragmatic soldiers," the Maybe said, "are the most frightening among the people whom I have known in my short life." Silver Fox laughed low in her throat. "And you doubt your own wisdom, mother?" Caladan Brood's command tent was situated in the centre of the Tista Andi encampment. Though she had visited it many times and had acquired some familiarity with the Tista Andi, the Maybe was once again struck by the sense of strangeness as she strode with the others into their midst. Antiquity and pathos were twin breaths filling the aisles and pathways between the high-peaked, narrow tents. There was little in the way of conversation among the few tall, dark-clothed figures they passed, nor was any particular attention accorded Brood and his entourage. Even Corlat, and Amanda Rake's second in command, received but scant notice. It was difficult for the Maybe to understand, a people plagued by indifference, an apathy that made even the efforts of civil discourse too much to contemplate. There were secret tragedies in the long, tortured past of the Tista Andi, wounds that would never heal. Even suffering, the Rivy had come to realize, was capable of becoming a way of life. To then extend such an existence from decades into centuries, then into millennia, still brought home to the Maybe a dull shock of horror. These narrow, arcane tents might be home to ghosts,
a restless roving necropolis haunted with lost spirits. The strangely stained, ragged ribbons tied to the iron tent poles added a votive touch to the scene, as did the gaunt, spectral figures of the Tista Andi themselves. They seemed to be waiting, an eternal expectation that never failed to send shivers through the Maybe. And worse, she knew their capabilities. She had seen them draw blades in anger, then wield them with appalling efficiency. And she had seen their sorcery. Among humans, cold indifference was often manifested in acts of brutal cruelty, was often the true visage of evil, if such a thing existed, but the Tista Andi had yet to reveal such wanton acts. They fought at Brood's command, for a cause not their own, and those few of them who were killed on such occasions were simply left on the ground. It had fallen to the Rivi to retrieve those bodies, to treat them in the Rivi way, and to mourn their passing. The Tista Andi looked upon such efforts without expression, as if bemused by the attention accorded to a mere corpse. The command tent waited directly ahead, octagonal and wood-framed, the canvas a much-mended sun-faded orange that had once been red. It had once belonged to the Crimson Guard and had been left on a rubbish heap before Outrider Hurlical had come to rescue it for the Warlord. As with the Standard, Brood wasn't much for proud accoutrements. The large flap at the entrance had been tied back. Atop the front support pole sat a great raven, head cocked towards the group, beak open as if in silent laughter. The Mybe's thin lips quirked into a half-smile upon seeing Crone. Anamanda Rake's favoured servant had taken to hounding Caladan Brood, offering incessant advice like a conscience twisted awry. The great raven had tested the Warlord's patience more than once. Yet Brood tolerates her in the same way he tolerates Anamanda Rake himself, the Mybe thought. Uneasy allies. The tales all agree that Brood and Rake have worked side by side for a long, long time, yet is there trust between them? That particular relationship is a hard one to understand, with layers upon layers of complexity and ambiguity, all the more confusing for Crone's dubious role in providing the bridge between the two warriors.
"Do Jack one arm!"
Crone screamed, the outburst followed by a mad cackle.
"Whiskey Jack, I bring you greetings from one Baruch, an alchemist in Derujistan, and from my master, Anamanda Rake, Lord of Moonspawn, Knight of High House Darkness, son of Mother Dark herself. I convey to you his, not greeting as such, not greeting, but amusement. Yes, amusement."
Dujek frowned. "And what so amuses your master, bird?"
"Bird?"
the great raven shrieked.
"I am Crone, the unchallenged matriarch of Moonspawn's cacophonous vast murder of kin."
Whiskey Jack grunted. "Matriarch to the great ravens? You speak for them all, do you? I'll accept that. Good knows you're loud enough."
"Abstat! Dujek one arm, my master's amusement is beyond explanation."
"Meaning you don't know," the renegade High Fist interjected.
"Outrageous audacity. Show respect, mortal, else I choose your carcass to feed on when the day comes."
"You'd likely break your beak on my hide, Crone, but you're welcome to it when that moment arrives." Brood growled. "Do you still have that beak strap, Hurlical?" "I do, sir." The great raven hissed, ducking her head and half raising her vast wings.
"Don't you dare, Ox! Repeat that affront at your peril!"
"Then hold your tongue." Brood faced the others and waved them to the entrance. Crone, perched over everyone, bobbed her head as each soldier strode beneath her. When it was the Mybe's turn, the great raven chuckled.
"The child in your hand is about to surprise us all, old woman."
The Rivi paused.
"What do you sense, old crow?"
Crone laughed in silence before replying.
"Imminence, dearest Claypot, and naught else. Greetings, child Silver Fox."
The girl studied the great raven for a moment, then said, "Hello, Crone. I had not before realized that your kind were born in the rotting flesh of a—"
"Silence!"
Crone shrieked.
"Such knowledge should never be spoken. You must learn to remain silent, child. For your own safety."
"For yours, you mean?" Silver Fox said, smiling.
"In this instance, I'll not deny it. Yet, listen to this wise old creature before stepping into this tent, child. There are those waiting within who will view the extent of your awareness, should you be foolish enough to reveal it, as the deadliest threat. Revelations could mean your death, and know this, you are not yet able to protect yourself, nor can the Mybe, whom I cherish and love, hope to defend you. Hers is not a violent power. You will both need protectors. Do you understand?"
Her smile unperturbed, Silver Fox nodded. The Mybe's hand tightened instinctively around her daughters, even as a tumult of emotions assailed her. She was not blind to the threats to Silver Fox and herself, nor was she unaware of the powers burgeoning within the child. "But I sense no power within me, violent or otherwise. Though, spoken with affection, Crow named me Claypot in truth, and all that it once protected is no longer within me, but standing here, exposed and vulnerable at my side." She glanced up at the great raven one last time, as Silver Fox led her inside. She met Crone's black, glittering eyes. "Love and cherish me, do you, Crow?"
Bless you for that.
The command tent's central chamber was dominated by a large map table of rough-hewn wood, warped and misshapen as if cobbled together by a drunken carpenter. As the Maybe and Silver Fox entered, the veteran Whiskey Jack, helmet unstrapped and under one arm, was laughing, his eyes fixed upon the table.
"You bastard warlord,"
he said, shaking his head. Brood was frowning at the object of Whiskey Jack's attention.
I'll grant you, it's not pretty. "That's because Fiddler and Hedge made the damn thing," the Malazan said. "In what wood?"
"Who are Fiddler and Hedge?"
"My two sappers, when I was commanding the 9th Squad. They'd organised one of their notorious card games, using the deck of dragons, and needed a surface on which to play it. 100 fellow bridge burners had gathered for the game, despite the fact that we were under constant attack, not to mention bogged down in the middle of a swamp. The game was interrupted by a pitched battle. We were overrun, then driven back, then we retook the position, all of which consumed maybe a bell. And lo, someone had walked off with a 200-pound table in the meantime. You should have heard the sappers cursing."
Caladan Brood crossed his arms, still frowning at the table. After a few moments, he grunted.
"A donation from the Motley Regulars. It has served me well. My, compliments to your sappers. I can have it returned." "No need, warlord."
It seemed the Malazan was about to say something more, something important, but then he simply shook his head. A soft gasp from Silver Fox startled the Maybe. She looked down, brows raised questioningly, but the girl's attention was swinging from the table to Whiskey Jack, then back again, a small smile on her lips.
Uncle Whiskey Jack,
she said suddenly. All eyes turned to Silver Fox, who blithely continued.
Those sappers and their games. They cheat, don't they?
The bearded Malazan scowled.
"Not an accusation I'd recommend you repeat, especially if there's any bridge burners around, lass. A lot of coins gone one way and one way only in those games. Did Fid and Hedge cheat? They made their rules so complicated, no one could tell one way or the other. So, to answer you, I don't know."
His scowl was deepening as he studied Silver Fox, as if the man was growing troubled by something.
Something, like a sense of familiarity.
Realization dawned within the Maybe.
Of course, he knows nothing about her, about what she is, what she was. It's their first meeting, as far as he's concerned, yet she called him uncle, and more. There's that voice, throaty, knowing. He knows not the child, but the woman she once was.
Everyone waited for Silver Fox to say more, to offer explanation. Instead, she simply walked up to the table and slowly ran her hand across its battered surface. A fleeting smile crossed her features. Then she pulled close one of the mismatched chairs and sat down. Brood sighed, gestured to Hurlicle.
"Find us that map of the Panyan Domain territories."
With a large map laid out, the others slowly gathered round the table. After a moment, Dujek grunted.
"None of our own maps are this detailed," he said. "You've noted the locations of various Panyan armies. How recent is this?"
3 days, Brood said. Crone's cousins are there, tracking movements. The notes referring to the Panyan's means of organisation and past tactics have been culled from various sources. As you can see, they're poised to take the city of Kapustan. Malric, Seta, and Blest have all fallen within the past 4 months. The Panyan's forces are still on the south side of the Catlin River, but preparations for the crossing have begun.
"The Kapustan army won't contest that crossing?" Dujek asked. "If not, then they're virtually inviting a siege. I take it no one expects Kapustan to put up much of a fight."
"The situation in Kapustan is a bit confused," the warlord explained.
"The city's ruled by a prince and a coalition of high priests, and the two factions are ever at odds with each other. Problems have been compounded by the prince's hiring a mercenary company to augment his own minimal forces."
"What company?" Whiskey Jack asked.
"The Grey Swords. Have you heard of them, Commander?"
"No."
"Nor have I," Brood said. "It's said they're up from Ellingarth. A decent compliment. Over 7,000. Whether they'll prove worthy of the usurious fees they've carved from the prince remains to be seen. Hood knows their so-called standard contract is almost twice the coin of what the Crimson Guard demands." "Their commander read the situation,"
Calor commented, his tone suggesting vast weariness, if not outright boredom.
"Prince Jerlakan has more coin than soldiers, and the Panyans won't be bought off. It's a holy war as far as the sea is concerned, after all. To worsen matters, the Council of High Priests has the backing of each temple's private company of highly trained, well-equipped soldiers. That's almost 3,000 of the city's most able fighters, whilst the prince himself has been left with dregs for his own Carpenthal, which he's prevented from expanding beyond 2,000 by law. For years, the Masked Council, the coalition of temples, has been using the Carpenthal as a recruiting ground for their own companies, bribing away the best."
Clearly the Maybe wasn't alone in suspecting that, given the opportunity, Calor would have gone on all afternoon, for Whiskey Jack interrupted the man as he drew breath.
"So this Prince Jerlakan circumvented the law by hiring mercenaries?" "Correct," was Brood's swift reply. "In any case, the Masked Council has managed to invoke yet another law, preventing the Grey Swords from active engagement beyond the city walls, so the crossing will not be contested." "Idiots," Dujek growled. "Given this is a holy war, you'd think the temples would do all they could to effect a united front against the Panyans. I imagine they believe they are,"
Kalor answered, with a sneer that could have been meant for Dujek or the priests in Kapustan, or both.
While at the same time ensuring that the prince's power remains held in check. It's more complicated than that, Brood countered. The ruler of Maurik capitulated with little bloodshed by arresting all the priests in her city and handing them over to the Panyans Teneskari. In one move, she saved her city and its citizens, topped up her royal coffers with booty from the temples, and got rid of an eternal thorn in her side. The Panyan Seer granted her a governorship, which is better than being torn apart and devoured by the Teneskari, which is what happened to the priests.
The Maibi hissed.
Torn apart and devoured?
Aye, the warlord said. The Teneskari are the Seer's peasant army. They're fanatics that the Seer doesn't bother supplying. Indeed, he's given them his holy blessing to do whatever is necessary to feed and arm themselves. If certain other rumours are true, then cannibalism is the least of the horrors. We've heard similar rumours.
Dujek muttered.
So, warlord, the question before us is, do we seek to save Kapustan, or let it fall? The Seer must know we're coming. His followers have spread the cult far beyond his borders, in Darujistan, in Pale, in Saltoan, meaning he knows we will be crossing Catlin River somewhere, somewhen. If he takes Kapustan, then the river's widest ford is in his hands, which leaves us with naught but the old ford west of Saltoan, where the stone bridge used to be. Granted, our engineers could float us a bridge there, provided we bring the wood with us. That's the overland option, in any case. We've two others, of course.
Crone, perched on one end of the table, cackled.
Listen to him!
The Maibi nodded, understanding the great raven and experiencing her own amused disbelief. Dujek scowled down the length of the table at Crone.
Do you have a problem, bird?
You are the warlord's match indeed. Word for word, you think aloud as he does. Oh, how can one not see the honed edge of poetry in your mutual war of the past 12 years?
Be quiet, Crone, Brood commanded. Kapustan will be besieged. The Panyan's forces are formidable. We've learned that Septarch Kulpath is commanding the expedition, and he's the ablest of all the Seer's Septarchs. He has half the total number of Beklites with him. That's 50,000 regular infantry, and a division of Erdemen besides the usual support attachments and auxiliary units. Kapustan is a small city, but the prince has worked hard on the walls, and the city's layout itself is peculiarly suited to district-by-district defense. If the Grey Swords don't pull out with the first skirmish, Kapustan might hold for a time. Nonetheless, my Black Maranth could land a few companies in the city, Dujek said, glancing over at the silent Twist. But without an explicit invitation to do so, tension could prove problematic.
Kalor snorted.
Now that is an understatement. What city on Janabakis would welcome Malazan legions into their midst? More, you'd have to bring your own food. You can be sure of that, High Fist, not to mention face outright hostility, if not actual betrayal, from the Kapan people. It's clear, Whiskey Jack ventured, that we need to establish preliminary contact with Kapustan's prince.
Silverfox giggled, startling everyone.
All this orchestration, Uncle. You've already set in motion a plan to do so. You and the one-armed soldier have schemed this to the last detail. You plan on liberating Kapustan, though, of course, not directly. You two never do anything directly, do you? You want to remain hidden behind the events. A classic Malazan tactic, if ever there was one.
Like the master gamblers they were, the two men showed no expression at her words. Kalor's chuckle was a soft rattle of bones. The Maibi studied Whiskey Jack.
The child's so very alarming, isn't she? By the spirits, she alarms even me, and I know so much more than you do, sir.
Well, Brood grumbled after a moment, I'm delighted to hear we're in agreement. Kapustan mustn't fall if we can help it, and an indirect means of relief is probably the best option, all things considered. On the surface, we must be seen, the majority of your forces as well as mine, One Arm, to be marching overland at a predictable pace. That will establish Septarch Kulpath's timetable for the siege, for both him and us. I take it we're also agreed that Kapustan must not be our sole focus.
Dujek slowly nodded.
It may still fall, despite our efforts. If we're to defeat the Panyan Domin, we must strike for its heart. Agreed. Tell me, One Arm, which city have you targeted for this first season of the campaign? Coral,
Whiskey Jack replied immediately. All eyes returned to the map. Brood was grinning.
It seems we do indeed think alike. Once we reach the north border of the Domin, we drive like a spear southward, a swift succession of liberated cities. Seta, Lest, Marik, won't the governess be pleased? Then to Coral itself. We undo in a single season the Seer's gains over the past 4 years. I want that cult reeling. I want cracks sent right through the damn thing. Aye, Warlord. So we march overland, yes? No boats? That would hasten Kulpath's hand, after all. There's one more issue to clarify, however.
Whiskey Jack continued, his grey eyes swinging to the one representative, apart from the Black Maranth commander, who'd yet to speak.
And that is, what can we expect from Anamander Rake? Call out? Will Letissa Andi be with us?
The woman simply smiled. Brood cleared his throat.
Like you, he said, we have initiated some moves of our own. As we speak, Moonspawn travels towards the Domin. Before it reaches the Seer's territory, it will disappear.
Dujek raised his brows.
An impressive feat.
Crone crackled.
We know little of the sorcery behind the Seer's power, the warlord said. Only that it exists. Like your Black Moranth, Moonspawn represents tactical opportunities we'd be fools not to exploit.
Brood's grin broadened.
Like you, High Fist, we seek to avoid predictability.
He nodded towards Corlat.
The Tista Andi possess formidable sorceries.
Not enough,
Silver Fox cut in. The Tista Andi woman frowned down at the girl.
That is quite an assertion, child.
Calor hissed.
Trust nothing of what she says. Indeed, as Brood well knows, I consider her presence at this meeting foolish. She is no ally of ours. She will betray us all, mark my words. Betrayal. It is her oldest friend. Hear me, all of you. This creature is an abomination.
Oh, Calor, Silver Fox sighed. Must you always go on like that?
Dujek turned to Caladan Brood.
Warlord, I admit to some confusion over the girl's presence. Who in Hood's name is she? She seems in possession of preternatural knowledge, for what seems a 10-year-old child. She is far more than that, Calor snapped, staring at Silver Fox with hard, hate-filled eyes. Look at the hag beside her, the High King growled. She's barely been 20 summers, High Fist, and this child was torn from her womb not 6 months ago. The abomination feeds on the life force of her mother. No, not mother. The unfortunate vessel that once hosted the child. You all shivered at the cannibalism of the Teniscari. What think you of a creature that so devours the life soul of the one who birthed it? And there is more.
He stopped, visibly bit back what he was about to say, and sat back.
She should be killed. Now, before her power surpasses us all.
There was silence within the tent.
Damn you, Calor. Is that what you want to show our newfound allies? A camp divided? And spirits below. Damn you a second time, for she never knew. She never knew.
Trembling, the Maibi looked down at Silver Fox. The girl's eyes were wide, even now filling with tears as she stared up at her mother.
Do I?
She whispered.
Do I feed on you?
The Maibi closed her eyes, wishing she could hide the truth from Silver Fox once again, and forevermore. Instead she said,
Not your choice, daughter. It's simply part of what you are, and I accept this. And yet rage at the foul cruelty of it, she thought. As must you. There is an urgency within you, Silver Fox, a force ancient and undeniable. You know it as well. Feel it.
Ancient and undeniable? Calor rasped. You don't know the half of it, woman.
He jolted forward across the table and grasped Silver Fox's tunic, pulled her close. Their faces inches apart, the High King bared his teeth.
You're in there, aren't you? I know it. I feel it. Come out, bitch.
Release her, Brood commanded, in a low, soft voice. The High King's sneer broadened. He released his grip on the girl's tunic, slowly leaned back. Heart-pounding, the Maibi raised a trembling hand to her face. Terror had ripped through her when Calor had grasped her daughter, an icy flood that left her limbs without strength, vanquishing with ease her maternal instinct to defend, revealing to herself and to everyone present her own cowardice. She felt tears of shame well in her eyes, trickle down her lined cheeks.
Touch her again, the warlord continued, and I will beat you senseless, Calor. As you like,
the ancient warrior replied. Armor rustled as Whiskey Jack turned to Caladan Brood. The commander's face was dark, his expression harsh.
Had you not done so, warlord, I would have voiced my own threat.
He fixed iron eyes on the High King.
Harm a child? I would not beat you senseless, Calor. I would rip your heart out.
The High King grinned.
Indeed, I shake with fear.
That will do,
Whiskey Jack murmured. His gauntleted left hand lashed out in a backhanded slap, striking Calor's face. Blood sprayed across the table as the High King's head snapped back. The force of the blow staggered him. The handle of his bastard sword was suddenly in his hands, the sword hissing, then halting, half-drawn. Calor could not move his arms further, for Caladan Brood now gripped both wrists. The High King strained, blood vessels swelling on his neck and temple, achieving nothing. Brood must have tightened his huge hands then, for he gasped, the sword's handle dropping from his grasp, the weapon thunking back into the scabbard. Brood stepped closer, but the Maibi heard his soft words nonetheless.
Accept what you have earned, Calor. I have had quite enough of your contempt at this gathering. Any further test of my temper, and it shall be my hammer striking your face. Understood.
After a long moment, the High King grunted. Brood released him. Silence filled the tent, no one moving, all eyes on Calor's bleeding face. Dujek withdrew a cloth from his belt, crusted with dried shaving soap, and tossed it to the High King.
Keep it, he growled.
The Maibi moved up behind a pale, wide-eyed Silver Fox and laid her hands on her daughter's shoulders.
No more, she whispered. Please.
Whiskey Jack faced Brood once again, ignoring Calor as if the man had ceased to exist.
Explain, please, warlord, he said in a calm voice. What in Hood's name is this child?
Shrugging her mother's hands from her shoulders, Silver Fox stood, poised as if about to flee. Then she shook her head, wiped her eyes, and drew a shuddering breath.
"No," she said. "Let none answer but me."
She looked up at her mother, the briefest meeting of gazes, then surveyed the others once more.
"In all things," she whispered, "let none answer but me."
Hermione reached out a hand, but could not touch.
"You must accept it, daughter,"
she said, hearing the brittleness of her own conviction, and knowing, with a renewed surge of shame, that the others heard it as well.
"You must forgive," she thought. "Forgive yourself. Oh, spirits below, I dare not speak such words. I have lost that right. I have surely lost it now."
Silver Fox turned to Whiskey Jack.
"The truth now, uncle. I am born of two souls, one of whom you know very well, the woman Tattersail. The other soul belonged to the discorporate, ravaged remnants of a high mage named Nightchill. In truth, little more than her charred flesh and bones, though other fragments of her were preserved as a consequence of a sealing spell. Tattersail's death occurred within the sphere of the Telan Warren, as projected by a Telan Imas."
The Mybe alone saw the standard-bearer Artanthos flinch.
"And what, sir, do you know of this?"
she thought. The question flitted briefly through her mind. Conjecture and consideration were tasks too demanding to exercise.
"Within that influence, uncle,"
Silver Fox continued,
"something happened. Something unexpected. A bonecaster from the distant past appeared, as did an elder god and a mortal soul."
Cloth held to his face. Calor's snort was muffled.
"Nightchill," he murmured. "Such a lack of imagination. Did Krull even know? What irony."
Silver Fox resumed.
"It was these three who gathered to help my mother, this Rivy woman who found herself with an impossible child. I was born in two places at once, among the Rivy in this world, and into the hands of the bonecaster in the Telan Warren."
She hesitated, shuddering as if suddenly spent.
"My future,"
she whispered after a moment, her arms drawing around herself,
"belongs to the Telan Imas.
She spun suddenly to call out,
They are gathering, and you will need their power in the war to come."
"Unholy conjoining,"
Calor rasped, hand and cloth falling away, eyes narrowed, his face white as parchment behind the smeared blood.
"As I had feared. Oh, you fools. Every one of you. Fools."
"Gathering,"
The Tista Andi repeated, also ignoring the High King.
"Why? To what end, Silver Fox? That is for me to decide, for I exist to command them all. My birth proclaimed the gathering, a demand that every Telan Imas on this world has heard. And now those who are able are coming. They are coming."
In his mind, Whiskey Jack was reeling. Fisher's and Brood's contingent was alarming enough, but the child's revelations... His thoughts spun, spiraled down, then arose in a new place. The command tent and its confines slipped away, and he found himself in a world of twisted schemes, dark betrayals, and their fierce, unexpected consequences. A world he hated with a passion. Memories rose like spectres. The enfilade at Pale, the decimation of the bridge burners, the assault on Moonspawn. A plague of suspicions, a maelstrom of desperate schemes.
Acheronis, Beladan, Nightchill, Tattersail.
The list of mages, whose deaths could be laid at High Mage Tasharin's sandaled feet, was written in the blood of senseless paranoia. Whiskey Jack had not been sorry to see the High Mage take his leave, though the commander suspected he was not as far off as it seemed.
Outlawry, Blastine's proclamation cut us loose, but it's all a lie.
Only he and Dujek knew the truth of that. The remainder of the host believed they had indeed been outlawed by the Empress. Their loyalty was to Dujek One-Arm.
And perhaps to me as well. And who knows? We'll test that loyalty before we're done. Yet she knows. The girl knows.
He had no doubt that she was Tattersail reborn. The sorceress was there, in the cast of the child's features, in the way she stood and moved, in that sleepy, knowing gaze. The repercussions that tumbled from that truth overwhelmed Whiskey Jack. He needed time to think.
Tattersail reborn. Damn you to Hood, Tasharin, inadvertent or not. What have you done?
Whiskey Jack had not known Nightchill. They had never spoken, and the breadth of his knowledge was based solely on the tales he'd heard. Mate to the Thelomen, Beladan, and a practitioner of High Rushan sorcery, she had been among the Emperor's chosen, ultimately betrayed just as the bridge-burners had been. There had been an edge to her, it was said, a hint of jagged blood-stained iron, and, he could see, what remained of that woman had cast a shadow over the child. The soft gleam in Tattersail's sleepy eyes had darkened somehow, and seeing it frayed the commander's already rattled nerves.
Oh, Hood!
One of those repercussions had just settled in his mind with a thunderous clang.
Oh, the gods forgive us our foolish games!
Back in Pale waited Ganoes Parran.
Tattersail's lover. What will he make of Silver Fox?
From woman to a newborn babe in an instant, then from that newborn to a 10-year-old child in 6 months.
And 6 months from now? A 20-year-old woman? Parran, lad, is it grief that is burning holes in your gut? If so, then what will its answering do to you?
As he struggled to comprehend the young girl's words, and all that he saw in her face, His thoughts turned to the Mybe standing beside Silver Fox. Sorrow flooded him. The gods were cruel indeed. The old woman would likely be dead within the year, a brutal sacrifice to the child's needs. A malign, nightmarish twist to the role of motherhood. The girl's final words jarred the commander yet again.
They are coming.
The Talanai Mass. Hood's breath. As if matters weren't complicated enough. Where do I place my faith in all this? Calor, a cold, uncanny bastard himself, calls her an abomination. He would kill her if he could. That much is plain. I'll not abide harming a child. But is she a child? Yes. Hood's breath. She's Tatassail reborn, a woman of courage and integrity. And Nightchill, a high mage who served the Emperor. And now, strangest, most alarming fact of all, she's the new ruler of the Talanai Mass.
Whiskey Jack blinked, the tent and its occupants coming into focus once again. Silence writhing with tumultuous thoughts. His gaze swung back to Silver Fox, saw the paleness of her young, round face, noted with a pang of empathy the tremble in the child's hands, then away again. The Tista Andi, Korlat, was watching him, their eyes locked.
Such extraordinary beauty, while Dujek is dog-face ugly, further proof I chose the wrong side all those years back. She's hardly interested in me that way, no. She's trying to say something else entirely.
After a long moment, he nodded.
Silver Fox, she's still a child, aye. A clay tablet scarcely etched. Aye, Tista Andi, I understand you.
Those who chose to stand close to Silver Fox might well be able to influence what she was to become. Korlat sought a private conversation with him, and he had just accepted the invitation. Whiskey Jack wished he had Quick Ben at his side right now. The Seven Cities mage was sharp when it came to situations like these. The commander already felt out of his depth.
Baron, you poor bastard. What do I tell you? Should I arrange a meeting between you and Silver Fox? Will I be able to prevent one once you're told? Is it any of my business?
Crone's beak gaped, but not in soundless laughter this time. Instead, unfamiliar terror raced through her.
Talanai Mass, and Krull, the Elder God, holders of the truth of the Great Ravens, a truth no one else knows, except for Silver Fox by the Abyss. Silver Fox, who looked upon my soul and read all within it. Careless, careless child. Would you force us to defend ourselves from you? From those whom you claim to command? We Great Ravens have never fought our own wars. Would you see us unleashed by your unmindful revelations? Should Rake learn, protestations of innocence will avail us naught. We were there at the chaining, were we not? Yet, aye, we were there at fall itself. The Great Ravens were born like maggots in the flesh of the Fallen One, and that will damn us. But wait, have we not been honourable guardians of the crippled god's magic? And were we not the ones who delivered to one and all the news of the Panyan Domin, the threat it represents? A magic we can unleash, if forced to. Ah, child, you threaten so much with your careless words.
Her black, glittering eyes sought out and fixed on Caladan Brood. Whatever thoughts the warlord possessed remained hidden behind the flat, bestial mask that was his face.
Rein in your panic, old hag. Return to the concerns before us. Think.
The Malazan Empire had made use of the Talanai Mass in the Emperor's time. The conquest of 7 cities had been the result. Then, with Kellanved's death, the alliance had dissolved, and so Genabakis was spared the devastating implacability of tens of thousands of undead warriors who could travel as dust in the wind. This alone had allowed Caladan Brood to meet the Malazan threat on an equal footing.
Ah, perhaps it only seemed that way. Has he ever truly unleashed the Tista Andi? Has he ever let loose Anamanda Rake? Has he ever shown his own true power? Brood's an ascendant. One forgets that in careless times. His warren is Tenes, the power of the land itself, the earth that is home to the eternal sleeping goddess, Burn. Caladan Brood has the power, there in his arms and in that formidable hammer on his back, to shatter mountains. An exaggeration? A low flight over the broken peaks east of the Laderon Plateau is proof enough of his younger, more precipitous days. Grandmother Crone, you should know better. Power draws power. It has always been thus. And now have come the Talanai Mass, and once again the balance shifts. My children spy upon the Panyan Domin. They can smell the power rising from those lands so thoroughly sanctified in blood, yet it remains faceless, as if hidden beneath layer after deceiving layer. What hides at the core of that empire of fanatics? The horrific child knows. I'd swear on the god's bed of broken flesh to that, oh yes. And she will lead the Talanai Mass to that very heart. Do you grasp this, Caladan Brood? I think you do. And even as that hoary old tyrant Calor utters his warnings with a bloodless will, even as you are rocked by the imminent arrival of undead allies, so you are jolted even more by the fact that they will be needed. Against what have we proclaimed war? What will be left of us when we are done? And by the Abyss, what secret truth about Silver Fox does Calor possess?
Defying her own overwhelming self-disgust, the Maibi forced brutal clarity into her thoughts, listening to all that Silver Fox said, to each word, to what lay between each word. She hugged herself beneath the barrage of her daughter's pronouncements. The laying bare of secrets assailed her every instinct. Such exposure was fraught with risks. Yet she finally understood something of the position in which Silver Fox had found herself. The confessions were a call for help.
She needs allies. She knows I am not enough. Spirits below, she has been shown that here. More, she knows that these two camps, enemies for so long, need to be bridged. Born in one, she reaches out to the other. All that was Tattersail and Nightchill cries out to old comrades. Will they answer?
She could discern nothing of Whiskey Jack's emotions. His thoughts might well be echoing Calor's position.
An abomination.
She saw him meet Corlat's eyes, and wondered what passed between them.
Think, it is the nature of everyone here to treat every situation tactically, to push away personal feelings, to gauge, to weigh, and balance. Silver Fox has stepped to the fore. She has claimed a position of power to rival Brood, and Amanda Rake, and Calor. Does Dujek One-Arm now wonder with whom he should be tealing? Does he realize that we are all united because of him? That for 12 years the clans of Barghast and Rivi, the disparate companies from a score or more cities, the Tista Andi, the presence of Rake, Brood, and Calor, not to mention the Crimson Guard, all of us, we stood shoulder to shoulder because of the Malazan Empire, because of the High Fist himself. But we have a new enemy now, and much of its nature remains unknown, and it has engendered a kind of fragility among us. Huh, what an understatement. That Dujek One-Arm now sees. Silver Fox states that we shall have need of the Talan Imas. Only the vicious old Emperor would have been comfortable with such creatures as allies. Even Calor recoils from what is being forced upon us. The fragile alliance now creaks and totters. You are too wise a man, High Fist, to not now possess grave doubts.
The one-armed old man was the first to speak after Silver Fox's statement, and he addressed the child with slow, carefully measured words.
The Talan Imas, with whom the Malazan Empire is familiar, is the army commanded by Logros. By your words, we must assume there are other armies, yet no knowledge of them has ever reached us. Why is that, child?
The last gathering, Silver Fox replied, was hundreds of thousands of years ago, at which was invoked the ritual of Telan, the binding of the Telan Warren to each and every Imas. The ritual made them immortal, High Fist. The life force of an entire people was bound in the name of a holy war, destined to last for millennia.
Against the Jagat,
Calor rasped. His narrow, withered face twisted into a sneer behind the already drying blood.
Apart from a handful of tyrants, the Jagat were pacifists. Their only crime was to exist.
Silver Fox rounded on the warrior.
Do not hint at injustices, High King. I possess enough of Nightchill's memories to recall the Imperial Warren, the place you once ruled, Calor, before the Malazans made claim to it. You laid waste an entire realm. You stripped the life from it, left nothing but ash and charred bones. An entire realm.
The tall warrior's blood-smeared grin was ghastly.
Ah, you are there, aren't you? But hiding, I think. Twisting the truth into false memories. Hiding, ye pathetic, cursed woman.
His smile hardened.
Then you should know not to test my temper, Bonecaster. Tattersail, Nightchill, dear child.
The Maibi saw her daughter pale.
Between these two, the feel of a long enmity. Why had I not seen that before? There are old memories here, a link between them, between my daughter and Calor. No, between Calor and one of the souls within her.
After a moment, Silver Fox returned her attention to Dujek.
To answer you, Logros and the clans under his command were entrusted with the task of defending the first throne. The other armies departed to hunt down the last Jagat strongholds. The Jagat had raised barriers of ice. Omtos Felak is a warren of ice, High Fist, a place deathly cold and almost lifeless. Jagat sorceries threatened the world. Sea levels dropped, whole species died out. Every mountain range was a barrier. Ice flowed in white rivers down from the slopes. Ice formed a league deep in places. As mortals, the Imas were scattered, their unity lost. They could not cross such barriers. There was starvation.
The war against the Jagat had begun long before then, Calor snapped. They sought to defend themselves, and who would not?
Silver Fox simply shrugged.
As Telan undead, our armies could cross such barriers. The efforts at eradication proved costly. You have heard no whispers of those armies because many have been decimated, while others perhaps continue the war in distant, inhospitable places.
There was a pained expression on the High Fist's face.
The Logros themselves left the Empire and disappeared into the Jag-Otan for a time, and when they returned they were much diminished.
She nodded.
Have the Logros answered your call?
Frowning, the girl said,
I cannot be certain of that, of any of them. They have heard, and will come if they are able, and I sense the nearness of one army. At least I think I do. There is so much you are not telling us, daughter, the Maybe thought. I can see it in your eyes. You fear your call for help will go unanswered if you reveal too much.
Dujek sighed and faced the warlord.
Caladan brood, shall we resume our discussion of strategy?
The soldiers once again leaned over the map table, joined by a softly cackling crone. After a moment, the Maybe collected her daughter's hand and guided her towards the entrance. Corlat joined them as they made their way out. To the Maybe's surprise, Whiskey Jack followed. The cool afternoon breeze was welcome after the close confines of the command tent. Without a word, the small group walked a short distance to a clearing between the Tista Andi and Barghast encampments. Once they halted, the commander fixed his grey eyes on Silver Fox.
I see much of Tattersail in you, lass. How much of her life, her memories, do you recall?
Faces, she answered, with a tentative smile, and the feelings attached to them, Commander. You and I were allies for a time. We were, I think, friends.
His nod was grave.
Aye, we were. Do you remember Quickben, the rest of my squad? What of Hairlock, Taishren? Do you recall Captain Parron?
Quickben, she whispered uncertainly. A mage? 7 cities? A man of secrets? Yes, she smiled again. Quickben. Hairlock. Not a friend. A threat. He caused me pain.
He's dead now.
I am relieved. Taishren is a name I've heard recently. Lassine's favourite high mage. We sparred, he and I, when I was Tattersail, and indeed when I was Nightchill. No sense of loyalty, no sense of trust. Thoughts of him confuse me.
And the captain?
Something in the commander's tone brought the Maybe alert. Silver Fox glanced away from Whiskey Jack's eyes.
I look forward to seeing him again.
The commander cleared his throat.
He's in Pale right now. While it's not my business, lass, you might want to consider the consequences of meeting him, of his finding out.
His words trailed away in evident discomfort.
Spirits below. This Captain Parron was Tattersail's lover. I should have anticipated something like this. The souls of 2 grown women. Silver Fox, daughter. We have met him, Mother, she said, when driving the Bedouin north. Do you recall? The soldier who defied our lances? I knew then. I knew him, who he was.
She faced the commander again.
Parron knows. Send him word that I am here. Please.
Very well, lass.
Whiskey Jack raised his head and studied the Barghast encampment.
The bridge burners will be visiting, in any case. The captain now commands them. I'm sure that Quickben and Mallet will be pleased to make your reacquaintance.
You wish them to examine me, you mean? Silver Fox said, to help you decide whether I am worthy of your support. Fear not, Commander. The prospect does not concern me. In many ways, I remain a mystery to myself as well, and so I am curious as to what they will discover.
Whiskey Jack smiled wryly.
You've the sorceress's blunt honesty, lass, if not her occasional tact.
Corlat spoke.
Commander Whiskey Jack, I believe we have things to discuss, you and I.
Aye, he said.
The Tista Andi turned to the Maybe and Silver Fox.
We shall take our leave of you 2 now. Of course,
the old woman replied, struggling to master her emotions.
The soldier who defied our lances, she thought. Oh, yes, I recall, child. Old questions, finally answered, and 1,000 more to plague this old woman. Come along, Silver Fox. It's time to resume your schooling in the ways of the Rivi. Yes, Mother.
Whiskey Jack watched the 2 Rivi walk away.
She revealed far too much, he said after a moment. The parley was working, drawing the bindings closer. Then the child spoke.
Yes,
Corlat murmured.
She is in possession of secret knowledge, the knowledge of the Talan Imas. Memories spanning millennia on this world. So much that those people witnessed. The fall of the crippled god, the arrival of the Tista Andi, the last flight of the dragons into Starvald Demelane.
She fell silent, a veil descending over her eyes. Whiskey Jack studied her, then said,
I've never seen a great raven become so obviously flustered.
Corlat smiled.
Crone believes the secret of her kind's birth is not known to us. It is the shame of their origins, you see, or so they themselves view it. Rake is indifferent to its moral context, as we all are.
What is so shameful?
The great ravens are unnatural creatures. The bringing down of the alien being who would come to be called the crippled god was a violent event. Parts of him were torn away, falling like balls of fire to shatter entire lands. Pieces of his flesh and bone lay rotting yet clinging to a kind of life in their massive craters. From that flesh the great ravens were born, carrying with them fragments of the crippled god's power. You have seen Crone and her kin. They devour sorcery. It is their true sustenance. To attack a great raven with magic serves only to make the creature stronger, to bolster its immunity. Crone is the firstborn. Rake believes the potential within her is appalling, and so he keeps her and her ilk close.
She paused, then faced him.
Commander Whiskeyjack, in Darujistan, we clashed with a mage of yours.
Aye. Quick, Ben. He'll be here shortly, and I will have his thoughts on all this.
The man you mentioned earlier to the child.
She nodded.
I admit to a certain admiration for the wizard, and so look forward to meeting him.
Their gazes locked.
And I am pleased to have met you as well. Silver Fox spoke true words when she said she trusted you. And I believe I do as well.
He shifted uncomfortably.
There has been scant contact between us that would earn such trust, Corlat. Nonetheless, I will endeavour to earn it.
The child has Tattersail within her, a woman who knew you well. Though I never met the sorceress, I find that the woman she was emerging further with each day in Silver Fox possessed admirable qualities.
Whiskeyjack slowly nodded.
She was a friend.
How much do you know of the events leading to this rebirth?
Not enough, I'm afraid, he replied. We learned of Tattersail's death from Paran, who came upon her remains. She died in the embrace of a Thelomen high mage, Beladan, who had travelled out onto the plain with the corpse of his mate, Nightchill, presumably intending to bury the woman. Tattersail was already a fugitive, and it's likely Beladan was instructed to retrieve her. It is as Silver Fox says, as far as I can tell.
Corlat looked away and said nothing for a long time. When she finally did, her question, so simple and logical, left Whiskeyjack with a pounding heart.
Commander, we sense Tattersail and Nightchill within the child, and she herself admits to these too. But now I wonder, where then is this Thelomen, Beladan?
He could only draw a deep breath and shake his head.
Gods, I don't know, he thought.